You are free to make decisions, but you are also responsible for whether or not those choices are moral or ethical. You can freely make any choice you want with what you do with your body, but not all of those choices are moral and ethical. And so if the child in the mother's womb is alive, then quite simply abortion is wrong. Abortion is an incredibly simple issue, but one that is enveloped in surprisingly complex considerations. The act of killing another human being is universally understood to be morally wrong in almost every situation. And so if the child in the mother's womb is alive, then quite simply abortion is wrong. And if the child in the mother's womb is not alive, then clearly there's nothing wrong with abortion. It seems so simple, and yet society would tell us it's much more complex with that. And much of the reason it feels more complex is because of this question of the mother's choice. You see, we all understand that we make choices every day, and we do this freely. I chose what clothes I was going to wear today. We choose where we're going to go. We choose what we're going to do. We choose what we're going to say. We all make choices all of the time, and we are free to do so. But here's the thing. While we always choose our choices, we don't always get to choose the outcomes of those choices. Think with me about what I might call the 3 steps that lead up to abortion. All right, step number 1 is sexual intimacy, right? This is where it starts. This is where the child or the baby is made. And this is a choice that someone makes. It's an action. And I am always responsible for the choices and the actions that I take. Now, the second step is pregnancy, because every time someone has sexual intimacy, they don't get pregnant. That's not always the outcome. Sometimes pregnancy is the outcome of sexual intimacy, and sometimes it's not. And here's where things get a little tricky for us, because sometimes we don't recognize that while I'm free to make my choices, I'm not free to choose my outcomes all the time. Sometimes the outcomes are out of my control. This is why we don't always hold car manufacturers responsible for drunk drivers, because even though they made the car, that was their choice, they didn't choose the outcome of someone using their car for the wrong reason. I love to eat Bill's donuts, and I make the choice whether or not I'm going to eat one. Sometimes if I eat too many of Bill's donuts, the outcome is bad with my cholesterol. And that's an outcome that I wouldn't choose and I didn't choose. Now, I'm not saying that there are not some outcomes that we choose, because there are some predictable outcomes that if I do A, B will happen, and we are responsible for those. But ultimately, what we need to understand, particularly on this issue, when someone chooses to be sexually intimate with another person, that outcome is up to God. Whether or not that act leads to pregnancy, that's up to God. It's not up to them. It's an outcome that is out of their control. But that leads to step 3, which is the decision, will I have this baby, or will I end the life of this baby? And again, now we are back to a choice. Because while we can choose our actions, we can't always choose the outcomes, but we do always choose how we respond to those outcomes. Here's the thing. You are free to make decisions, but you are also responsible for whether or not those choices are moral or ethical. You can freely make any choice you want with what you do with your body, but not all of those choices are moral and ethical. You choose which clothes you wear. Am I gonna wear blue jeans or am I gonna wear khaki pants? That's not morally equivalent to choosing whether or not to embezzle someone else's money. You can choose to embezzle other people's money. You're free to make that choice. You can choose to be unfaithful to your spouse. You're free to make that choice. You can choose to lie about a coworker to avoid getting in trouble. You are free to make that choice. You can choose to cheat on your taxes. You're free to make that choice. And all of these choices that you're making, these are choices that you're making with your body, and you are free to make those choices, but you are responsible for whether or not those choices are moral and ethical. And we all understand that these choices to embezzle, to cheat, to lie, those are not the moral equivalent of choosing to care for the poor or to empower the oppressed or to lift up those who have been left behind. For this reason, it is not enough to simply say, I am free to choose. I must also evaluate whether or not my choice is moral or ethical. And for that reason, we circle all the way back to where we started with this simple question: is the child alive in the mother's womb? It's not my intent to make a profound scientific argument here. I just want to talk simple logic and reason with you. And let me suggest this. A being that has a heartbeat and brain waves is probably a being that is alive. Even more so, a being that can choose on its own to move and be active is probably alive. And even more so, a being that can respond to outside and external stimulus is probably alive. And at some point in every mother's pregnancy, they will tell you that my child is moving, my child is choosing to move, my child is responding to what they hear in the outside world. And of course, we know that there is a certain point in pregnancy when the heartbeat begins and brainwaves begin. And so we can see clearly without a shadow of a doubt that that being that is in the mother's womb is alive. A heartbeat, brainwaves, choosing to move, responding to external stimuli. But there's a biblical argument for this too. And this is just a fun one, but in the book of Luke chapter 1, Mary, who is now pregnant with Jesus, goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who is pregnant with John the Baptist. And the Bible tells us that as Mary is approaching Elizabeth, that John the Baptist leapt in the womb of his mother. John the Baptist started kicking excitedly because he understood that the presence of Jesus had just come his way. What a powerful argument for life in the womb. That even in the womb, this prophet was enough alive, enough alert, that he could sense the presence of God coming near him, and he responded appropriately. Abortion has a lot of complexities. I get that. But sometimes we just need to boil it down to the simplicity of one question. Is the child alive in the mother's womb? And if the child is alive in the mother's womb, then to end that life has to be wrong.